Oh. Immense members.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So we're in the, which room is this in Government House?
This is what we call the drawing room.
Yeah.
We've got 2 or 3 receptions here, and depending on the size of reception we're giving,
Yeah.
we use 1, 2, or 3 of them.
And there's double doors that you can open up for more guests. Yeah.
It's over 100 tomorrow night, so
right.
I guess we'll use 1 or 2 of them for that.
Well, I think you had a smaller gathering last week because you were celebrating a birthday. I
Yeah, that was a big gathering actually, but we've had such wonderful weather here in the Isle of Man that we did it all outside.
Excellent. Yeah.
So,
does that make it easier?
Yes, well, it does, especially at a time when COVID has come back onto the island.
Yeah.
People are naturally a bit bothered about. I mean, that was at a time a week ago when people weren't not quite as bothered as they are now. So when you can really have something, it's better. But anyway, it was a lovely evening, and that's place to be. We put the bar outside, and everyone had their food and drink out there.
Very good.
But, that doesn't happen often. You can never predict it here.
Well, we've had some.
Your nose.
We've had some unseasonably warm weather, haven't we?
I don't think we've had any rain to talk of in July.
Yeah.
Certainly not in this part of the island.
I don't know if you've seen a house down in Port Aaron has been struck by lightning today.
That, and the electricity got that around Colby area, parts of the Colby area, I believe.
Yeah.
So, no, this is very unusual. We had a bit of thunder, the rain hasn't arrived yet. And even thunder in the Isle of Man is rare.
It is, yeah.
Thunders that work themselves out from across the Irish Sea.
Yeah, yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about your career in the diplomatic service before you were appointed as Lieutenant Governor?
Yes, I had about 40 years in the British diplomatic service. 2/3 of them overseas, 1/3 in London.
David, we can't quite hear the Governor.
Right, okay, I'll move the microphone a bit nearer. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, try again, sir, please.
If I talk normally like this, can you hear me now?
Still a little bit muffled.
Where is the microphone?
The microphone is on here, yeah.
Right.
It's on, yeah.
How about that? Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you so much.
Okay, not at all. I can't move myself around because otherwise I'll go out of the camera.
It's quite wide ranging. So
really?
You're in full view now. So right.
Good. So I spent about 2/3 of my time abroad in big places and little places. I didn't seem to do many medium places. So we had big places. Argentina, Spain's big place. Indonesia was one of the biggest places and huge population there as well. And little places. Swaziland, Eswatini down in southern Africa.
Yeah.
Bermuda, finish off with as a diplomat, and I had a lot to do with Gibraltar in one job and the Falkland Islands in another. And they're different. And what happens when you're in the big countries, you get more involved in some of the big worldwide issues. Indonesia, I was there during 9/11, and the US occupation of Iraq with the US forces in tow. That's the biggest Muslim country in the world.
Yeah.
And certainly much the biggest Muslim democracy. They wanted to know what the heck was going on, why the United States, with UK support, was deposing the Taliban from the government in Afghanistan when they wouldn't hand over Osama bin Laden 10 years ago, and then why then the Western forces need to go into Iraq against Saddam Hussein. And so there was a lot of explaining to do. Whereas in little places like Bermuda or Swaziland, the issues are much more broken, but in some ways, the British interest in those was very great and very specific. Bermuda is British territory. Some of the people listening in North America have probably been there for holidays. And Swaziland has links to Britain much stronger than with almost anywhere else. So there were more of a question of getting involved in local affairs, but with a strong British angle in them too. So as to which I preferred, I don't think, I just think they were so different. I loved Argentina, I loved Spain, I loved Indonesia, but I like the little places too. And all that stopped 9 years ago when I retired public service. I didn't think I would be doing it again. And 4 years later, the appetite rekindled, and the route to becoming a lieutenant governor here or in Guernsey or Jersey is a different one. There's no involvement of the part of the diplomatic service in any way, no part involvement of the British Foreign Office. This was something that was run, it's an appointment by the palace, by the Queen on a recommendation from the island.
So perhaps your experiences in Bermuda and Gibraltar would be relevant to coming to the island.
Yes, I think so. And lots of visits years and years ago to the Falkland Islands. But overseas territories are different from what we call the Crown Dependencies, Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, because the overseas territories, British government is still directly involved because they're directly responsible.
Right.
So the governor, whether it's in Stanley or Gibraltar or Hamilton in Bermuda, they have to listen to the British government in certain areas. In Bermuda, for example, the British government, through the governor, through the role I played there, appoints the police chief, deputy police chief, the judges, prosecutor, and there's a reason for that. And it's not because the governor knows all the candidates. He has to hunt around and find some good ones. The reason is so that only he can sack them.
Right.
And so the government, if they get cross with their police chief and with their auditor general or with their judges, they can't sack them. And that's what provides the anchor to windward, in the President Bush's senior's famous phrase, to any danger of those British territories slipping off in the wrong direction and doing what they shouldn't do. Now, the Crown Dependencies relationship is very different because these are places close at home. The association has been hundreds of years, and there is a much greater sense that London know what will happen here, and what will happen here will be very close to what London are doing themselves, not least because we're all in a customs union, and until 6 months ago, and through the UK, partly in the EU. So there is no written constitution in somewhere like the Isle of Man, but there's an unwritten and long established assumption that the UK will not involve themselves in matters, domestic matters.
Yeah.
And they haven't, not for over 50 years.
Okay. So, I mean, you're the representative of Her Majesty the Queen, the Lord of Man. What are the most important or sort of high profile duties that you undertake on her behalf?
Well, there are two formal duties, I think. One is I sign off almost all the legislation that comes out of the Manx Parliament in Ward. And it's called royal assent. I give the royal assent in the place of the Queen. If there's something that directly involves her, or foreign affairs or defence, then we'll need to refer it to the palace. But in all the legislation I've signed off in 5 years here, I think that's happened two or three times, that's all. So I do that, but that's very straightforward. The legislation is debated in the two branches of Tynwald. It's checked in London to ensure that it doesn't contravene any of the Isle of Man's international human rights obligations or other obligations. And then it comes back and gets its final reading in Tynwald, and then I sign it off. But someone's got to do that, and it is the Lieutenant Governor's role to do it. There's a second role which has come back after many years because legally it is more sound, and that is the Lieutenant Governor signs off all the applications for British nationality made by what we call third country nationals living in the Isle of Man. And that would include Americans, US citizens, Canadian citizens, a lot of South Africans who have come over here to work and decide that they want British nationality, which they can. It's a longish process. You can start it after 5 years, being here for 5 years. And I go through all of those, and there is a provision in those that you have to decide whether the applicant is of good character, and that is not defined at all. So there's a little bit of a little bit of
gossip comes into it, maybe.
Bit of attention there. We never want a case where a new British citizen is suddenly held up in front of the Old Bailey or one of the courts in London for having done something dreadful, and people say, well, where did he or she get their citizenship from? And another son says, well, the Isle of Man, they're a soft touch over there. So we've got to keep an eye on that. Those are the two formal parts of the role. And then informally, the important thing, and the thing that takes far the most time, is joining in the activities on the island that the people of the island want us to join in, my wife as well. And those are charities across the board. We're patrons of about 70 or 75 Isle of Man charities, and we get involved with a lot more who want us to turn out. Musical events, a lot of music, concerts, musicals, plays, and enjoy them very much. They're very good. Some sporting activities, and then some of the military organisations, veterans organisations. The British Legion is enormously strong here. It's the strongest branch, what they call county branch of the British Legion in the whole of the British Isles here in their activities. Then there are veterans organisations in other areas, regiments that have got particularly strong ties between the British Army and the people here in the Isle of Man because they've served there. So it's all of those activities that people ask us to join in. Now there's another strand which I've been keen to try and do, and that is on the business front. But where there are businesses which, if you like, are outward facing, I think that's the jargon these days. In other words, their markets are across the water, whether in the UK or further, and they may be owned by overseas. There are a couple of the 3 or 4 engineering companies here owned by American conglomerates, big American firms, Triumph and Swagelock are both American owned, major employers and major industrial engineering companies here. To all of them, and likewise the banks, the foreign-owned banks, the South African banks and British banks here, I've said, if you want to involve Government House, when your senior people come to town, or when your major customers come to town, or when new investors, if we're trying to raise new capital, which has happened, come to town, you won't hear anything very different from me rather than talking to the Chief Minister or to the Treasury, the Finance Minister. But you'll just hear a different verse from the same song, if you like. So bring them up here. And that was going quite well until 18 months ago when COVID hit, and then all sorts of activities which we had planned for last year couldn't happen because the people couldn't come to the island. But that is more the Lieutenant Governor of the day takes the initiative to do that or not. And I enjoyed doing that, and I enjoyed meeting, getting to know something of what those firms are doing and helping out when they asked. So as I say, that came to rather an abrupt stop in February last year.
I mean, we had the Chief Minister on yesterday, and he was talking about how companies do stuff for Boeing and for various space projects, and some of which was a sort of surprise to me, really. But I mean, I would say that obviously we've encountered each other through the lifeboat, but of the lieutenant governors that I can recall, you're probably the most accessible. I mean, we saw you out walking when we were all in lockdown, and we allowed an hour's exercise a day, and so I mean, and welcoming people from overseas and taking them to the Government House, I'm sure puts the Isle of Man in a good light. So thank you for doing that. I mean, I've seen in the paper, the Chief Minister up here. I mean, do you have to sign like emergency legislation to do with COVID restrictions?
We did last year, because for the border regime which they wanted to put in, which was essentially a closed border, initially closed to everyone, even residents couldn't come back to the island if they went off island. And then slowly that softened up, but it remained a regime whereby people from off the island couldn't come here unless they had very special reasons to come here. To do that, when they looked at the law, required use of a 1930s piece of legislation. Emergency legislation, Emergency Powers Act, I think it was called, and that has to be enacted by the governor, obviously on the advice of the Isle of Man government. And I did that every month for 3 months. And then a lot of regulations flow from that, and the emergency regulations stipulating exactly what the terms are and what will happen if they're broken by people coming onto the island, and lots of other things here. And all those individual regulations had to come through me as well, whether it was late in the evening or the weekend or whatever. And they were very fast moving, and they were quite tricky. And again, I signed those off on the advice of the government, and I wouldn't ever query the substance of them. Sometimes you can see they've done them in a great hurry. Just occasionally you say, are you sure the courts will make sense of this if someone comes up on this charge? You could amend it a tiny bit. But that's as far as that went.
Yeah. Well, I think even many of our viewers, stroke listeners, were aware of the infamous gentleman who made a trip to the island on a jet ski in lockdown last year.
Yes. Well, I don't know whether he made enough by telling his story to the newspaper afterwards. Buy himself a little house in the Lake District where he came from, or southern Scotland, wherever. But no, he was a rather extreme case, and that saga between those two has gone on further. But now the restrictions are off. and people can come here as long as they come from the UK.
Yep.
Or now they can come as of this week from a bit further afield as well to the island. And as long, I mean, the government are quite clear, and I think they've got pretty strong support from Timwald and the ministers, not 100%, but a majority support for this, as long as the hospital doesn't fill up with their infections. And in particular, intensive care. And it's not, last I saw, there were 5 people in hospital that they've gone up by 1 or 2. And that's manageable. And the overwhelming majority of people here with COVID now are young. They're teenagers, 20s, 30s. There are very few of older people. So they get the disease, and that's bad luck, but it's like a variant of symptoms they've had if they've got flu, and the chances are they'll get over it fairly quickly. So it doesn't have the tragic connotations, or hasn't done so far. So the fact that we've got over 2,500 cases of COVID circulating on the island sounds bad, but the age groups which are affected are the young, and they are very rarely, but they're the young because they haven't been vaccinated yet.
And as with the UK, the link has been broken between the infections and hospitalisation and deaths.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, fingers crossed that goes on the same way, and then because the island now can have a late tourist season, August, September, very attractive here, lovely time to be here, and people who want to come across get with their bicycles and motorbikes, even though there won't be any MGP racing, but they want to come across, can do that, walk the coastal path through to the autumn, and the heritage railways, they call them, the steam train and the electric tram to Ramsey, they're all running again, so people can jump on and off those, and that's a big draw. There are a lot of people in the UK, including a few people I know who go around British Isles, Europe and beyond, looking for these old forms of transport, and that forms the theme of their holiday, as long as it's somewhere congenial, somewhere where they can go and have a decent pub supper in the evening as well. Certainly, I very much hope, and everybody hopes, that August, September we'll see some of these people coming here.
Well, I hope so. I mean, we were chatting yesterday, and the fact that we have a friendly regime in terms of COVID for UK visitors will be beneficial. So, I mean, do you must have a good, close working relationship with the Chief Minister?
Yes, he likes to brief me on what's going on, and I like to listen. And sometimes I never offer any comments on the policy here. That's not the role of the Lieutenant Governor. But if I bumped into something that's vaguely analogous somewhere else around the world, I might say. I mean, the great thing about the Lieutenant Governor's role is that nobody has to take a blind bit of notice of what the Lieutenant Governor says, because he has no role in the executive, no role in the running. But if he happens to say something that's relevant,
you have a lot of experience.
Well, that's what. And so far, I mean, they've had recent Lieutenant Governors have been. There've been a few diplomats, retired diplomats, as myself, my immediate predecessor, and a chap I knew who was here 20 years ago, Timothy Daunt. And then there have been a lot of military, retired admirals, air marshals, and the end of September, the next person turning up, and he's a retired general, Lieutenant General from the Army. And so the island makes that choice between choosing someone from within the island, which they've not done yet, who would know exactly what goes on here, or choosing someone from outside who's knocked around the world a bit and whom they think they can house train into the ways of the Isle of Man. So far, they've taken the latter choice, but it's entirely up to those three who used to call, nicknamed the Three Musketeers. There are now 4 of them. It's entirely up to them to decide as to who they put forward. It's then entirely up to the Queen whether she approves that recommendation, of course, but she has done. And that's only been systems been running for the last 3 Lieutenant Governors. Before that, there was an element, London got more involved, but not for the last, not when I was, nor my predecessor, and nor the new man coming in a couple of months.
I mean, I wonder if it would work having a local person, a little bit like when you said we were in Bermuda, was it, where you know only you can sack certain individuals, so that encourages everybody perhaps to work together. you appoint somebody local, people are going to know what they did in the past, and that may be a disadvantage.
I used to say in Bermuda, where they hadn't actually taken a local candidate, but there had been one or two good local candidates, the sort of person who might be deemed neutral enough and not to have baggage would be a retired Chief Justice, first Teamster here, all that. But it may be that the island chooses not to go down that route for the foreseeable future. That's a matter entirely for the people of the island. The mixture of the three musketeers, I nickname them, are the Chief Minister himself, President of General, senior presiding officer of Parliament, that is, and the most senior judge, the first Teamster.
Yeah.
And now, because there is another second very senior judge here, who is the Judge of Appeal, he's been roped into that.
Right, so he's the fourth.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of changes in the Musketeers and the leading people in the island. You're moving on. Chief Minister's moving on. Mr. Skelly, who is now the president, he did live in San Diego and is a past president of the North American Manx.
Indeed, no, he's got a very strong North American connection. That's good.
Yeah. So lots of changes in the Isle of Man. I mean, what would you say are the opportunities in 2021 and beyond for the Isle of Man, post-Brexit, post-COVID, all the changes that have happened?
Well, I think the opportunity to be tested, I don't know if it'll become real or not, is if people who used to go 5 days a week into central Manchester or Liverpool or wherever, Chester, to work over in England, have found in the last 18 months that they can do that from home in some village or in the Wirral of Lancashire.
Well, anywhere. Yeah.
Or anywhere.
Yeah.
Then they could do it from here. And if the lifestyle here appealed to them, they could come and they could run their British activities, their British concerns, whether public sector or more likely perhaps commercial sector, for a bit here, and still go across to their offices once a week. Air services to Liverpool, Manchester, even though air services are still far fewer than they were before, but they run well over to there already. And then in time, they could decide whether to move the enterprise over here. Now, this is speculation. Obviously, we don't know. There's been a strong interest in property buying from people in Lancashire and elsewhere in the northwest. Yeah, I'm told. And let's see. But one of the things that I think the Government House, where we're sitting today, could do a bit to help with that would be to say, right, when you're welcoming these people or when you're explaining to these people what is the sort of life they can expect here, bring them up to Government House. When, it's a half-hooked. We couldn't see everybody who's got a frivolous wish to come to Government House and pretending they're going to come and live in the island. But the more serious candidates, more serious people who want to move, Government House could get involved in that. And I think it's quite exciting because when you think of some of the people who've come over from Northern Britain to the Isle of Man with their wealth, they haven't just sat on that wealth. A number of them have got going, doing very interesting enterprises here as well. Even though they're retired, even though they're in their 70s, and some of them are still doing it into their 80s. So they can be not only the effect of someone coming over and paying, there's a fixed sum of tax that some of your people listening may be aware of. Whatever your annual income, you only pay up to a maximum of £200,000 a year. But it's not just that revenue, is if they then set up companies or they then get going again with their entrepreneurial spirits undimmed, then that creates employment and economic activity, and the island can benefit, as it has from people like Trevor Hemmings with his hotels up in Ramsey, Jim Mellon with a house in Port Erin, but hotels in Douglas, and others as well.
I mean, the employment of people has been the usual driver for change cameras and put the video off. I worked in the insurance industry. Companies paid no tax, but employed lots and lots of people. That was the incentive. But perhaps that type of business is a little more 80s than it is 21st century. I don't know. So some of the unusual tasks. I mean, you were kind enough last year to share a Zoom with my 100-year-old cousin. What other unusual activities are requested of
Well,
Lieutenant Governor.
the centenarians are fun. We get invited by various other people turning 100 when they know that they can ask the Lieutenant Governor to go along. And I remember one tremendous lady out in Ramsey. She was Spanish originally, though she'd come across here in the late 1930s, 40s. And she turned to my wife and said, with a mischievous look in her eye, the way people over 100 are allowed to, she said, "I bet you hate these sort of things. Don't you? All these strange people you have to meet and you never get to see again." So you come across even the most senior citizens on the island have got a mischievous streak. There was another splendid centenarian, another woman who said, "Well, actually, I'm a bit busy on my 100th birthday. Will you come back for my 101st next year?" Which we did, and she was still going very strong indeed. And we've had a very well-known character locally, an ex-World War II hero, who was in the Normandy landings, and before that in the North Africa campaign, Hector Duff, who was going around all the schools and telling them about the horrors of war. He wasn't dressing it up, telling them about the horrors of war and the importance of maintaining the peace. And Hector we were all, fingers crossed, didn't have to worry. Hector sailed into being 100 with lots of celebrations, including here. And indeed, we all went to his 101st party when he was celebrated as the person across the British Isles who, in a popular vote, the people had decided had done most for what they call soldiering on, which means carrying on with the spirit and the activities related to the armed forces well after you retire. So those people are great fun. But also some of the activities where you go and maybe cutting a ribbon or not, where people are inaugurating something out of the ordinary. And there's people who've been here may remember that the Curragh, there's a wildlife park, well, they've now extended it around the back of the park into some nature trails and walks there. And we were asked to inaugurate that with a whole lot of children the other day. And that was good fun too.
Ramsey Pier last week, I think.
And then Ramsey Pier, which is a long project, because it's a very long pier. It's on for 2,000 feet out into the Ramsey Bay, and an inspiring lot of volunteers there have completed what they call the first 3 bays of the pier. Well, there are 60 bays to that pier, so there's a little bit more work to be done. But they are very pleased, and rightfully pleased, and justifiably pleased that they've done this, and replacing the steel girders and replacing the wooden stuff. The actual feet of the pier going into the seabed are fine, thank heavens, otherwise it would be impossible. But everything at the top level has had to be pulled off and redone, and they're doing it, and they're now going on to bay 4, 5, 6. So being involved with that sort of thing is good fun. And then some of the activities commercial activities as well you see around here, I'd never realized until we went to the trout farm that a major export, certainly for the first few years we were here of the Isle of Man, were millions of guaranteed fertilized trout eggs,
right,
which all go to Russia. And I had someone here from London who was interested in these sort of things, so I asked the manager of the trout farm to come over and talk to him, have supper with him. And he did, and I introduced him proudly, the manager. I said, and this, whatever the visitor's names were, this is the man who ensures that 4 million guaranteed fertilized trout eggs go to Russia. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, Lieutenant Governor, it's not 4 million, it's 40 million guaranteed eggs go to Russia every year. And that sort of thing, like some of the aeronautical engineering stuff, is not really aware of. You mentioned the doing taking on contracts for Boeing or British equivalent, which is British Aerospace, or Rolls-Royce when it comes to engines. And they explained it to me, the managing director here of a engineering company. It's American owned, and he said, and he showed me a slab of expensive titanium alloy, about the size of a mobile phone. And he said, we buy this for £1,000, and we drill a lot of very fancy holes in it. And then we send it off to British Aerospace and we charge them £10,000 because the amount of work involved in that is so great. And when you've got that sort of business, which all depends on the skill, and it's very high value, low volume, the fact that you have to spend a few pounds, a few dollars on the postage going to over to Britain doesn't matter at all. And that's not the only bit of fancy engineering that's done here. They won't do sort of major pipelines and things like that because that's silly, because the transport costs would be prohibitive. But if you're doing something, another of the, again, American-owned companies here makes very sophisticated valves for gas fields and oil fields. They don't do the pipes, but they do the valves and the controls for that. And that often that goes to the Middle East or to the North America or whatever. And getting under the skin a little bit of those. And the man who invented the cutout kettle, the kettle that stops boiling automatically when it is here, Dr. John Taylor. He sold the company on for a good sum of money. It's now a public company listed on the stock exchange in London. I went to London. I was in London when it was listed the first day. And there they make that very little bit of clever, it's a metal alloy that when it's hit by a lot of steam, it will click and that switches you. And another one that if the first one doesn't work, will click when the kettle is in danger of actually boiling itself dry. And most of their production of the kettles is done in China, but this most sophisticated bit is not. It's done here on the Isle of Man, and they're expanding their workforce, and they're doing well. I mean, people have heard of these companies. Strix is a well-known company here, but it's only when you invite yourself or get asked to actually go and look at the production line and try and begin to understand it, you realize that that's whether it's Paul answers your question of the unexpected, exceptional things to do on the island. I don't know, but it's certainly something that's
well, I've learned some things about the Isle of Man this evening, so
it's also great fun to me. Or looking at the racehorses that one or two people have here, one in particular, the biggest steeplechase race the most famous race in the UK is the Grand National, run at Aintree in Liverpool every March, and the chap who's won that 3 times has his horses here because it is safe. They're no longer racing, but when he has them being trained, other horses being trained, Wales, England, Scotland, but when they retire, they come over here, and he's very proud, and he keeps them all in tremendously good form. When you go and see them up there, asking nicely, that sort of activity, if you call it activity, it is an activity. It employs a few people and is quite exceptional. I think is adds more variety and luster.
And it all helps to get the Isle of Man known in different circles, doesn't it? So what does the future hold for you after you leave the island, sir?
Well, I retired from public service once 9 years ago, and now I'm going to have another go. I didn't make very good fist of it the first time, but now I'm just turned 70, and I think it's about time to stop pretending and just to get on and retire somewhere. And we've got a home over on the east coast of England. I've been there for a long time, and in need of a lot of attention. It's been neglected the last couple of years, and we haven't really been able to get over there. And we've got sort of friends in there. And there are some charities and other activities over there, which I was a bit involved in. I'll get more involved with now, one I hope, over there. And pick up. You do a bit of
sailing, I think, is that right?
A bit of sailing there, yes. It's very different sailing from here, because you're sailing there in big tidal bays.
Yeah.
And at high tide, you've got a couple of miles to play with by a mile wide or more by 3 or 4 miles long. And at low tide, it's mud, all of it. So you have to, the sailing is confined to a couple of hours either side of high tide, not like going out of Port St. Mary or Port Erin or Ramsey here. But I hope to get back involved with some of that. And the bird watching, which is a very good part of England for that, which is part of the attraction. First took me and my wife there 40 years ago. We might we will do that, but might get re-engaged with some of the organisations there to do that. And in due course, come back and have a holiday in the Isle of Man, I hope, because we have been very struck by this island. We've really enjoyed 5 years here. It's what we wanted, is that mixture of a community at ease with itself, comfortable in its own skin, if you like. And therefore, if a community has this quiet self-confidence, which strikes me that the people in the Isle of Man do, it's all the easier for them to welcome outsiders. If they haven't got hang-ups, if you like, amongst themselves, between themselves, then and they're relaxed, confident that the way they're doing things is what best suits them best, then outsiders come in, and as long as it's sensitive to the way things happen in the Isle of Man, are warmly welcomed, as we were, from one end of the island to another.
I mean, if we're trying to do business all over the world, then you have to welcome people from the UK and beyond, and make them feel at home in order to set up their business or their home or both here. So, what advice would you give to your successor?
Well,
hypothetically,
I'd hesitate to advise a man who's a 3-star general, spent decades in the British Army and got to a very high rank, and is a very intelligent man. He's a Middle East specialist, speaks Arabic, all sorts of things that the modern generals do. They're impressive men and women. No, I suppose the only advice would be the obvious one is accept every invitation, especially in the first year. And
right.
There's a pattern. Half of what we do is probably on an annual basis. The same things come around. But say yes to everything to start with, and then take it from there.
And what perhaps time is his biggest challenge then, accepting all the invitations and.
Well, there's plenty of time really. Sometimes you get asked to do more than one thing on a Friday evening or a Saturday or Sunday morning. And then you have to decide, which we work a very simple thing. When we said yes, we don't go back on it. If we said yes to something, even if it's a smaller organization doing something involving just a few dozen people in one corner of the island, once we said yes, we'll stick with that. So yes, that happens mostly at weekends, Friday evenings, Saturdays or Sundays. But otherwise, because there's no real paperwork, signing this legislation and approving new bids for British nationality takes very little time. And because you're not reporting as Lieutenant Governor to the British government at all, I spent my life, I spent 40 years reporting to the British government, trying to get the British government to understand what was happening in Argentina or Indonesia or even Bermuda or the Falklands and Gibraltar. There's none of that. So, the biggest issue you have is who to invite to dinner or who to invite to some reception and check that they've got the gin and tonic in.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot that you can be away from the desk because the desk work is minimal for as much as people want you to do.
Yeah.
And people don't expect the Lieutenant Governor to go to where they are small scale events, say a branch of the British Legion, the Veterans Organization. They have events every year, some of them quite a few times a year. They don't expect the Lieutenant Governor to go every time. And so for those sort of things, we've probably been a couple of times to each of them. So you can space it out a bit. But on the whole, people ask the Lieutenant Governor because they would like the representative of the Queen there. But in their mind, it makes it adds a bit of that's a bit of profile to the event.
Well, if you can put on the tickets.
And that's and you print it on the tickets and on the program, which means you have to agree well in advance because they've got to go to print with it, to press with it. You've got to stick with your commitment then. And that's fine. Good luck to them. And we enjoy doing it. I think, when was it? It's coming up, not this weekend, the following weekend. I think there are about 3 things running with the life.
Well, there are, we haven't got ourselves organised properly. There's Port St Mary doing a tug of war, and Peel have 2 things on. So
yes, that's right. In the morning. I'm going out on the sailing for the disabled boat. This is a Sunday in 10 days' time.
Oh, right.
The sailing we're out of Peel. Get back in time for the service at the Peel lifeboat, which is a lovely service out on the breakwater.
Yeah.
And you have the Mariners Choir. For people in North America who've never heard them, the Mariners Choir are a splendid group of average age, I should think it's about 70, 75, with voices in good form. And when they're singing just inside the boat shed or just outside the boat shed, as they will be that Sunday if the weather's good, it's a splendid thing to be here. And then I'll jump in the car and go off to the the second part of the tug of war down in Port St Mary, because the lifeboat organisations are very active here. You've got 5 lifeboat stations around the island, and no one would ever expect the island to raise the capital sums needed when those lifeboats are renewed, because you're talking 7 figures. I think, aren't you? I don't know how much they are.
Well,
anyway, they are
millions.
Millions.
Numbers,
they are millions and millions of dollars each. I don't know whether there's as many as $10 million. I don't know. There are a lot of $1 million. And so that money is, of course, going to, a lot of it come from the lifeboat, Royal Lifeboat Organisation, covering the whole of the British Isles. And people expect that. People in inland districts of the UK will be contributing, even though they don't have a lifeboat station anywhere near them. And that will be to maintain something like towards a position like the Isle of Man with 5 lifeboat stations and only 85,000 people. But the local fundraising is important to keep the profile of the island eye out, and it then means that people will leave legacies in their wills as well. And so the amount of money raised on the island for the Royal National Lifeboat is actually very high. It's very strong, and the boats are all used.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sometimes because people are daft, and sometimes because people have are just unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we've got the bicentenary coming up, and that does coincide with the next visit of hopefully quite a few members of the North American Manx coming to the Isle of Man in 2024.
Good.
So as I have a foot in both camps,
yes.
There's going to be a high lifeboat content.
Is that the year when there's a chance of the tall ships going here as well?
Well, other people are working on getting tall ships, and
that would be a tremendous boost. We were in Bermuda when that happened.
Yeah.
In 2009, they all came through, and that's not only a very fine sight, obviously, but it focuses people on the island. And if you can pull that off as they come down the Irish Sea or go up the Irish Sea, that would be a great boost for the position of the Isle of Man as somewhere to call in and spend some time when you're in these waters.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there will be boats of all sizes coming from all around the Irish Sea.
That's right.
And maybe you will return also.
Well, maybe we'll try and get back to that.
Yeah. So thank you for your time. What are we doing? 40 minutes. Can we see if there's any questions from the forum? Can you manage that, Bill, please?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Anyone has a question, just please raise your hand and unmute yourself. Jack? You're still on mute, Jack. There you go.
I just want to call attention to myself in the sense, in honor of the Lieutenant Governor, I'm wearing my, I think it's called the Court of Tynwald tie.
Very good.
Which I don't know how many of those are around anymore.
Yeah.
So.
So you've filled the screen now, Jack. So well done.
Yeah, thank you.
You wear it every day?
Only on special occasions such as this one.
Yeah.
Right.
Jack, please tell us where you're from and what society you're affiliated with.
Okay, I'm with Northern California Manx Society. I'm here in California, in Silicon Valley.
Very good. And your link with the island is because it's somewhere that you started life, or your family did, or? My
grandfather.
Right.
Well, I think he was the 4th Daniel Cormode in a row. Was from around Bride, Kirk Andrews, that sort of thing. And he emigrated to the U.S. in 1904.
Very good. All right. And you've been back here, and you've been over here to have a look?
I've been over, I think, 8 times.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
So they need a few extra people if they're up in Bride. It's one of the least populated parishes in the Isle of Man. Yeah. And they don't even have enough people there to run a primary school at the moment. So if you're any of your younger generations feel like sticking around when they come over here, and particularly in that corner of the island, it's got quite some attractions you'd have seen. Don't hold them back.
Oh.
If you know the right people, they'll give you Manx nationality or British nationality.
Yeah, that's very good.
So what's he coming on pin? How do I do that? Any more questions? Mary.
I would like to know if there's some way to follow up on the Mariners chorus or choir, what the title was. Can we somehow hear them on YouTube or some website?
I'll ask them. try and get word back to you. They probably have done some recordings. They must have done.
I'm sure if you search Isle of Man Mariners Choir on YouTube, if they've done something, it'll pop up.
Yes.
So it
They're
is
not of an age.
Mariners Choir.
Yeah.
Mariners, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
They're not of an age to be the most IT savvy group of elderly
Somebody will have
gentlemen.
done it for them.
So
Yeah.
someone would have helped them. But
And some of our viewers are not either, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
You can't. That's the main
no,
thing.
they're lovely. They give on Sunday evenings. They choose their churches and they go around all the different churches, mostly Methodist,
nice.
sometimes Anglican churches on the island, and the service revolves around them, the evensong.
And a supper afterwards.
And a supper afterwards, yeah. That's right.
As with most things in the Isle of Man.
I see Tom had a comment or a question. If you could unmute yourself, Tom.
Hello, I apologize for my mic playing with it, doing its own thing earlier. So I just wanted to mention that many years ago, when I was lucky enough to include the Isle of Man on my sort of regular circuit of the UK, I stopped frequently to visit in some of the museums and historic sites as part of my research. And I was always stunned at how accommodating the museum in Douglas was to my minor research needs, but they always went out of their way to make sure I had everything I needed to accomplish my purpose. And you normally don't get that sort of level of service in museums around the world, and I have always appreciated that, and that led in part to many of my fond memories of the island.
Thank you. Well, that's very good to know. It is a feature of the island here. When someone makes the direct pitch for a bit of help, people are naturally helpful, and they want that person to have a good experience on the Isle of Man. And we are still asked, my wife and I, 5 years after we came here, with a little hesitation in the questioner's voice, do we enjoy it here? And I know what they hope to hear as an answer, obviously, but the mere fact that it matters a lot, I think, to people on the Isle of Man, that visitors, whether people who stay for 5 years as we have, or people who are staying for a week or two, as you may have been, it matters a lot to people that they are enjoying, that they have a good, satisfactory experience of whatever they're doing on the Isle of Man. And people, therefore, go to a lot of trouble to ensure that happens. And it's the same with the industries, the aeronautical engineering industries we've mentioned once or twice. They will find that it may be Boeing, it may be Rolls-Royce aero engines who ring up and say, do you remember that thing you made us 10 years ago? Could you do another half dozen? And Rolls-Royce or General Electric, Boeing, know that if they ask that of their main suppliers, they'd say half a dozen, 6 of them? No, ask us for 60 or 600 and we'll do it. But the Isle of Man, they'll say 6, yes, sure. When do you want it by? Tuesday or Wednesday? Because that's the way people think here and prepared to do it. So it cuts across the board. It's nice to hear that you had that experience in the Manx Museum here in Douglas, but it doesn't surprise me greatly because that of a par with what people want to do. You out in the country roads, you don't even have to find a bus stop. You put your hand out and the bus driver will stop because that's what he wants to do, to give you a lift to wherever you need to go. So it is in that sense a very welcoming, quite low key. If people don't make a big fuss about being helpful, but they just are helpful.
Well, of course, we welcome you to the Isle of Man, but you now have access to the Eye Museum.
Yes.
So you can get a lot of stuff, without coming here, but, don't use that too much. Do come and see us.
Yeah, that's right.
And Tom, could you let us know where you're from and if you're affiliated with one of the societies?
I've been sort of off and on involved with the Greater Washington Area Manx Association here outside of Washington, D.C. So since I ran into a couple of members of the society at my part-time job one day, and I recognized they were wearing a shirt with Isle of Man. I think it was the stitching with the big pump up at Laxey. Was
Laxey Wheel.
The Laxey Wheel, thank you, it just popped out of my head. So they were stunned that I knew what it was and started a good friendship with them, and it's always a good reminder of all my visits to the island.
Well, that's great, and we're very glad to have you with us in Washington. Katie has a question.
So this is Florence's granddaughter and the current president. You go.
Hi. Yes, the current president from Chicago, Katie a lot of you know me. I was wondering, as you're on your way out, is there anything on the island you wish you would have done that you didn't have time to do?
There's one thing that people have offered us to do. We may not have time to. There's another one where there was one we were going to do with indeed the David here, who's with the lifeboats. We were going to go out for a second time on the lifeboat into Douglas Bay, but there just hasn't been time this month for that. But the other one is they do carriage driving here with horses for the disabled. And some of them are mentally disabled and some of them physically disabled. And what they do with that is splendid. I've seen it once or twice. We had the Princess Royal, the Queen's daughter, Princess Anne, over here 10 days ago, and we took her there because she opened that centre as an equestrian centre, but she'd never seen this being done there. And the thought of doing carriage riding was a splendid, would have been a good one. We might squeeze it in, we might not. One thing we've only done very recently, which was high on the list, was to with a bit aid of a few ropes and a lot of scrambling, go down one of the high cliffs down in the south, Bradder Head, down to sea level, which you can do. There are oil paths there, and go into the old copper mines. And these are copper mines that were probably first worked in the Bronze Age, but very superficially, but then a good deal more about 900 years ago, and then much more 150 years ago in the Victorian era. And it's quite a scramble to get down. You need to have those ropes at the time. And the idea of those miners who were going down every day, 6 days a week, down this very steep path, to spend probably 12 hours hacking out ore in the mine, hacking out the copper, and there's a bit of lead down there as well, and then trekking back up and then making their way to their villages was awe-inspiring. It was quite something to do on a Sunday morning. It took the whole of Sunday morning to do it, even though we didn't have a pick and shovel and didn't have to do any mining when we were down there. So that's something special. Now that is something that's not open to the public unless you set it up with the mining group in advance. So I don't want to make that sound like a tourist attraction because but it isn't. The other thing I haven't done much here is sea fishing. I fish a bit on the inland waters for trout. I haven't done much sea fishing, and people do. I get to have a lot of fun out of it. You have to be pretty stable in a small boat because the Irish Sea is not always flat calm.
Absolutely.
But those are a couple of things that I would I might yet do, or would do if I was starting afresh.
Right. Well, perhaps just one more. Is there anybody, Bill? It's way past Howard o'clock, which.
Yes.
It looks as if we have asked our questions.
Right.
Right. Good. Well, thank you very much for having me into your homes. We can say that literally when we're doing this Zoom business. What is this evening here in the UK, but is much earlier in the day for all of you in North America and the United States. And I wish your society and the branches of the society around North America, lots of activity when you're allowed to get together, but continued interest, continued momentum. Because it's not always easy when you're going back several generations for the link to the place that you're commemorating when you meet, or the place that you have the common interest in. And if you can keep that up, then that will be splendid. And people at this end, such as our host here, keep up the link from here. And I hope, and I'm sure, welcome members of the North American Manx Association when you come over. Yeah.
Well, I'll let you know the date of the 2024 meeting. It'll be around Tynwald Day. Yeah. So
because we all know that there's this huge Manx diaspora. Most of the time, they just get on with life, and just like the Scots do all the way around the world, and plenty of people in North America whose origins are from Scotland. But it's nice when people pause for every once in a while and say, "Well, let's think of where we originally, or where our grandparents or whoever originally came from." Thank you very much for this evening.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Thank you.